gut heute? Hey! Warum antwortest du nicht, du Arschloch? Ich will zu Mama!
Wenn die Profis noch nicht mal mit dir klarkommen, wie soll ich das dann schaffen?
Sie sind ihre Mutter.
Benny braucht eine langfristige Lösung.
Ja?
Erzähl, du darfst nicht einfach in mein Zimmer.
Ich bin ein Schulbegleiter.
Ich mach mal einen Vorschlag.
1-1-Betreuung. 3 Wochen im Wald.
Wo ist denn der Fernseher?
Gibt's nicht. Kein Strom, kein Internet. Und schönes Plumpsklo-Kacken.
Ich hasse dir! Hey. Weil ich mal so auszicke, darf ich nicht zu Mama.
Das kannst du ja ändern. Hast du schon mal dein Echo gehört?
Mama hasst mich.
Ain't got no home,
Willst du mein Papa sein?
ain't got no mother,
Ich hab schon eine Familie, Benny. Und du auch.
friends, ain't got no nothing.
Ich habe manchmal richtig Angst vor ihm. Ich kann es nicht mehr.
Verabschieden Sie sich wenigstens von Ihrer Tochter!
Ain't got no love.
Ich verliere die nötige Distanz.
Ist das jetzt Ihr Ernst? Diesmal muss es klappen.
Je älter du wirst, desto beschissener werden die Maßnahmen.
Ich hab die Verantwortung für dich!
Keine Sorge, das ist Sicherheitsglas.
Erzähl.
Wie heißt ich?
Ekelmaßmensch.
Na also, wird er.
Hello and welcome to this BFI at Home event and Woman with a Movie Camera Q&A. I'm Hannah Flint, a film and TV critic, and I'm joined by Nora Fingscheidt to talk about her film, System Crasher. Nora, hello. Welcome.
Hi, Hannah.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Well, fingers crossed our system won't crash while doing this Q&A, but we've had a few tests, so we'll probably be good.
Probably.
I mean, let's talk a bit about the cinematic journey for you to get System Crasher made. Obviously, you've done quite a few short films, you've done documentaries too. So tell me about that transition going from short films, documentary to narrative feature.
Yeah, it was a pretty long journey. While in that journey, I wish it would have been shorter, you know. It was, I think, in total 6 years from the first idea to really write that story about Benny until the movie finally premiered in Berlin. So I originally come from a fiction background. So I started off with narrative short films, and then I studied fiction directing in a film school in the south of Germany. And then at some point of my studies, I got a bit, not bored, but I was curious about exploring documentary work. And besides film school, I made this documentary project about a shelter home for homeless women, and we portrayed this house for about a year, coming in and out, getting to know the ladies who lived there. And one day, a 14-year-old girl moved in, and I was so shocked because the institution was like a pretty depressing place, you know, like a dead end of life. So I asked the social worker, like, what on earth is this 14-year-old girl doing here? And she said, well, it's the System Crashers. We can always take them in on their 14th birthday because no institution in the whole country dares to take that girl. And that was the moment where I thought, okay, wow, this is a fiction film that I want to make. And it was pretty clear that it needed to be a fiction film, at least for me, and not a documentary.
And why is that? Why? Because I mean, you know, I think what the final product feels very forensic about the ins and outs of this system. There's somewhat of a fly on the wall kind of documentary kind of feel to it. But why was it you wanted to do a narrative fiction rather than a non-fiction?
Yeah, I think it started off, like when I first wanted to make films, I was like probably a teenager, and I come from a background where nobody in my family does anything with art. So, but I loved movies and I loved art also, you know, and music and painting and all that. And when I figured out that filmmaking is an actual profession, you know, I thought like, finally I have this plan for life. And in that moment already, I wanted to write a story about a like wild and angry little girl with kind of too much energy, which has kind of semi-autobiographic elements to it. but I never, like, I tried in several attempts, I tried writing that story, and I never found a story that is, I don't know, interesting enough. And I think when I was about 23, I abandoned the idea. I was like, okay, probably it's never going to work. Maybe it's just too personal or something. And then, you know, when I had this, like, when I heard about the System Crashers, it was like something that hits you from behind, where you go like, oh my God, this is finally the story about this little character that I always wanted to write about. And now I finally found a story that's not my personal story, but that's interesting enough to kind of, at least I thought, could be cool for a German audience. I wasn't so sure about the rest of the world, to be honest, you know, because I thought it might be too specific about the bureaucratic childcare system, which in a way is a little absurd to me, you know. The Germans and their bureaucracy is pretty absurd anyways. And then when that comes into, you know, social fields, it gets really very absurd, yeah.
I thought it's interesting that you said in a way the original story that you wanted to do was too personal, but this gave you, I suppose, a separation to be able to infuse all those elements that you want to talk about. You know, I often hear some people like I said, you have to write yourself before you can really write someone else, and I suppose this is a way of kind of doing that. So how much would you say was putting yourself into the character of Benny? Or even kind of, you know, in the story as a whole, your experience, not saying you were a system crasher.
Yeah, I mean, kind of, you know, I think automatically it happens that probably there is a big part of myself in each character as well, you know, in Miss Baffanet, Micha, but also in the mom in a way. Like, I can definitely relate, but I would say like probably 20-30% if I don't know. It's hard to number it, because then it was a long period of research, and I met so many people during that research, and they all influenced the writing process. So probably about like 25 different people all kind of merged into Benny, and I'm one of them, you know, probably the most consistent part, but they all kind of, you know, adults, kids, boys, girls, men, women, they all kind of formed this character, same for every other character as well. But I did, you know, when you were asking about short films, I once did a short film that was very personal, like a really personal story. And I figured that it didn't work out for me, because I kind of, you know, I was then hesitant about what to do with the characters, because I kind of knew them, you know, and that experience really at least transformed me to a way that I said, I don't want to, like, yes, it needs to be personal, but not like, I don't know, specific personal, because then it's hard to keep the creative freedom.
It can be quite putting yourself out there, whether you're going to give the honesty, I suppose, that you want to give the character. I mean, there's one thing about Benny is that there's no holds barred. It's like everything is out there, her rage, her emotions. Yeah. You see that in every moment of it. And there's, I suppose, maybe a freedom there for you to go to places that you might not feel comfortable with. It's kind of your name on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that was, I think, the driving force, you know, through all the years, because there have been times when I thought, oh God, this movie is never going to be made, you know, and there were several attempts when it was about to get made, and then it didn't, and then we didn't have enough money, and then we didn't have a broadcaster on board. But her energy, like the energy of this character, was that one thing that basically started, yeah, to evolve 20 years ago, you know, and then for the last 6 years, I really thought like it would be so cool to have such a radical movie in a way, or at least a radical character. Yeah, and actually there's a British film, Made in Britain. Do you know that?
I don't know that. I'll add this onto my list of what to watch afterwards.
Yeah, it's an amazing movie. It's not too long. It's like a 70-minute movie, and it's from the 80s. And Tim Roth, he plays like a young neo-Nazi who has this swastika tattooed on his forehead. You know, it's a very intense film, but this film definitely has a radicality of the main character. Like I don't know, there is just like zero compromise from the main character from minute one until the very end. And you can't help, in a way, you hate the guy, but it's also fascinating, you know, because there's like no compromises. And that was like a big inspirational movie for me, where I thought always, because sometimes in the script process people were like, oh yeah, you're making this Pippi Longstocking story, and then I was like, no, it's not Pippi Longstocking, you know. It needs to get, if it translates as Pippi Longstocking, then it needs to get harsher or more radical. Because
absolutely. I think what's so remarkable about Benny as a character, especially as a female character, giving her the space to have that rage. Like, so often there's a stereotype of what young girls are supposed to be, especially how they're perceived on screen. You know, they don't swear, I mean, you go back to something like Hit Girl, maybe in Kick-Ass movie, you know, that was so shocking because it was a young girl with the profanity killing. But I mean, obviously Benny, there's kind of that, it's so rarely allowed to manifest that way on screen. And for you, that was, I suppose, one thing in the writing of it. Like you said, it's like, let's make sure that we're kind of putting kibosh on these stereotypes, especially in situations where, you know, you often see men being angry, young boys being angry. It's like their anger is allowed, whereas girls aren't supposed to get that angry about things. And I wondered that, you know, for you, that was so important to show that there are more sides to girlhood, womanhood, especially in a system where it's kind of seems like nothing really is working for people, whether they're boys or girls.
Exactly. Yeah, as you said, absolutely. Also, the whole medication and ADHD debates, you know, and how to treat those kids. It's usually boys, and the girls kind of get swept under the carpet. So yeah, for me, it was much more challenging to tell the story about a girl, but also kind of closer, because I mean, when I think of childhood out of the perspective of a little girl, and I remember well how it feels when you're like too much for the adults, you know, and they kind of like you, but they also have the feeling like, oh, give me a break, and you can't help because your energy is just like bursting. So I do remember how that feels.
So from your first draft, and like you said, it took you quite a while to actually get to the point where you had a shooting script that you were kind of ready to make. What kind of changes did you make, or additions that you had to add? How did that kind of script evolve from the initial draft to the shooting script that you worked with to actually make it?
Yeah, it slowly evolved. There weren't any major changes. You know, sometimes I tried something, like somebody was suggesting, wouldn't it be better if Micha is a woman? And then I tried that, but it didn't work, because then it kind of got all too confusing with Miss Baffané and the mom and just the women around her, you know. So basically there was a rough idea, and then I started researching, and I spent really days and weeks in different institutions. I was partly living there, you know, and playing with the kids and spending the days with them, and just to understand the different tones, because I thought, like, if you tell that story where the background of the person is always changing, how do you do that cinematically without it getting massively confusing to the audience? So, and in a weird way, it's supposed to feel all the same, like it's another institution, another institution, another institution. However, we need to kind of be orientated as the audience member. And therefore, I thought for me, it's important to understand the different, like, daily routines. How do people communicate? You know, what's the difference between a foster home and a child psychiatry ward, for example? So I spent really, I would say, 1 or 2 years just researching, writing, and then always kind of correcting my writing based on the research. And the main shift was that at first I started off saying, like, oh man, why aren't the people more patient with kids like Benny? I mean, those kids are important for our society as well, you know. And then as I spent time in those institutions, I was like, oh my God, I couldn't do that job. Like, it would completely overwhelm me on the one hand, but then also I couldn't deal with 10 of those kids at the same time, you know. I would lose my mind, and then again, it would break my heart all of a sudden, you know, when the parents come and you see how desperate the kids are, and you can't really help vicious circles that go on for generations and generations. And you know, some of those kids will also be parents one day. However, you need to keep hope, otherwise you can't do the job. And then you need to keep the professional distance in order to have a family or at least stable relationships of whatever kind. So that changed, you know, my, yeah, I think approach from judging the system to massive respect for every social worker.
I think one thing that you could easily do is create heroes and villains within this story, you know, have the kind of the mean person, you know, at the foster system. But actually, I think you avoid that. It's done, but you still have the kind of, I suppose, in a way, is your villain in this sense is kind of the system, and it's on the periphery. Does that kind of talk to me about how you kind of, yeah, making sure that it was more, I suppose, level-headed in a way, and actually, you know, also try and ensure that the perspective first and foremost is Benny's, and how you were able to create this story where this is a personal kind of one girl, but also a big comment on the system in general.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as you said, you know, in a way, you think the system is the antagonist, but then you realize the system consists of human beings, you know, who actually mean well and trying to help. And then also what I try to do in the writing is that the biggest antagonist is Benny herself. So that there isn't the good and the bad, but the main character, you know, is the main antagonist herself. And that there comes a point in the story for the audience where we go like, we are afraid of her because of herself. And not so much because we're afraid that the system's going to take her. We're afraid that she's going to hurt somebody or hurt herself. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose then creating that perspective, it's very, it's there's a visceral feeling, you know, when you kind of see her in action, and it's quite kinetic, but it's also kind of deeply emotional, personal. Creating that with your, you know, cinematographer, you know, working with your crew, like how are you kind of working together to create that kind of perspective that feels sometimes quite claustrophobic, but it's always somehow moving, bubbling, simmering.
Yeah. So our mandate, to put it that way, or our mantra, you know, was that Benny's energy needs to be reflected by each aspect of filmmaking. So in a way, you know, the music is kind of, it's childish, but sometimes it's too much, or it's a little bit annoying, you know, or the colors that she wears, they're in a way like too bright or too colorful or irritating, at least, you know, always making her stick out. And the editing is kind of, you know, untamed a little bit, and, you know, jumps and doesn't have a clear rhythm. So as the story itself, even the dramaturgy of the story is, there comes a point where you go like, I can't deal with it anymore, you know, please make it stop. And then it goes on, and that is also a reflection of Benny's energy, because we needed it to exaggerate it in that term that you would understand why professionals say, I can't do it anymore, and not judge them too early. You need to reach that point where you as the audience also think, I understand them. I wouldn't know what to do.
And I suppose let's talk about Betty, or Helena Zengel. Like, she is just, it's just remarkable what she brings. Just knowing that she's a child, bringing the energy you would kind of, you see in actors. You see some actors not even be able to achieve that level. Where did you find her?
Yep. So we were super lucky. Let's put it that way. I mean, during writing, and the script writing itself was about 4 years, I thought probably I'm never going to find a girl who can play that role, you know, or if I find a girl, probably the parents will never allow it. I don't know if I would, you know, thankfully my son doesn't want to be an actor, but if he would, and he would come around the corner with that kind of script, because the script was basically as the movie is. We didn't improvise a lot in order to protect her, you know. So the script already had all the aspects of the story, and it was a harsh one. And so we started the casting process 1 year before shooting, which actually is a way too early because kids change, you know. But I was so paranoid not to find the right girl. that we did with a child casting agency, the first round. So she reached out to different child casting agencies and said, like, please just read the synopsis. Who's the first kid that comes into your mind? So we had this first round with 10 girls from all around the country, and Helena was girl number 7. And it was so, I mean, it was so amazing because, again, you know, girls are educated in a different way. So usually, even if some girls are super talented in the casting process, you can feel that they're not being comfortable with pushing somebody or, you know, using bad words. And I had this one little casting task where I said, we had a male grown-up actor as the casting partner. And we said, like, get him out of the room, no matter what you do. Everything is allowed. Just make sure by the end he's out of the room. And so usually the girls were like, really? What do you want me to do? And I'm like, yeah, you can ask him to leave, or you can use bad words, or you can push him. Let's play upside down world. The worse you behave here, the better is for us, you know? So I would say 80% of the girls were like, I don't know any bad words, you know? And we're like, really? What's the baddest word, the worst word you know? And they're like, idiot. And you're like, So with Helena, when I said we play the upside down world, the reverse kind of world, her eyes started glowing. And she was like, really? I can behave like I want to? Like I'm not gonna get, you know, any consequences? And I said, no, I promise you, you know, just pretend, you know, this is the worst possible behavior is the best. And then she really had fun with it. And in real life, you know, she's a super nice girl and she does ice skating. She's very good at school. She has a horse, you know, you can't even imagine. But she had so much fun breaking out of that. It kind of was so beautiful to watch, you know. And yeah, that's how we found Helena. It was magical. Girl number 7.
Yeah. You know what? After watching the film, I can absolutely believe she was like, "Yes, let me break free, let me say all the bad words." She said quite a few. Well, I suppose, you know, I mean, the way I keep thinking about how her skin would go pink when she was in the full rage,
Right.
and you know, this is a very intense role, and you know, it can be quite a lot for an adult, let alone a child. So I suppose for you, your working relationship, working with Helena, but also Albrecht, who obviously plays Mikhail, like how are you working together to make sure that, you know, you're getting the most powerful performance, but also, you know, protecting everyone's well-being, because this isn't, you know, light stuff.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, yeah, I was, let's put it that way, very aware of the responsibility, not to say super scared of it, you know. And it was the most important thing was Helena's well-being and safety, you know. And it started basically on that casting day, you know, the conversations with the mom, and we met again, and we cast many other girls, but we always again met with her, and she read the script but with her mom together, you know. And then she had millions of questions, but she still wanted to play the role. And I think 6 months before shooting, we really shook hands and we said, okay, we're going to do it together. And basically from that moment on, we started preparing the role, not every day, but at least I would say 2 or 4 times a month. You know, that sometimes we would just go shopping to secondhand stores and she would select some clothes, or she would select the little dragon that Benny has, and we would make lists like, how does Helena behave and how would Benny behave, almost a little bit opposite like you would work with an adult, you're not looking so much for what they have in common, you're really looking for the differences between the 2 characters, so she would never mix it up. And then sometimes she was part of casting the other adults. When I found somebody who was my favorite for a part, then they would play together, and slowly through that she would understand Benny's whole universe. Like, oh, that's the doctor and she's nice, and that's educator Mark and I don't like him. So when we started to film, she already knew Benny's universe and she knew it was fiction, and she could really, like, this playful jump in and out. And then, of course, filming with a kid her age is very restricted. In Germany, you can only film 5 hours. We had an additional lunch break, 45 minutes, and once a week we could film for 8 hours, but that was it. So we had many shooting days in order to not push too much stuff into those 5 hours, you know. And also, like, when you split up the story into, I think we had like 65, 70 shooting days, something like that, with a 3-week break in between, then it's more like 1 or 2 scenes a day. And we would try and make sure that we have the balance between a scene where she's angry with a scene where something funny happens, or with Micha in the woods, or, you know, so that it's not just like tantrums all the time for 5 hours.
Well, I mean, the reaction, I suppose specifically, you know, the foster system, when they saw that, you're kind of putting them on show here. What was the reaction, I suppose, from the bureaucracy, from what you're showing?
Yeah, so very good. I mean, there are always, you know, people who say like, it's not the reality, and they are right. It is not the reality. You know, I took a lot of creative liberty. For example, in real life, a character like Miss Baffanet would probably be 15 different people and not one person, but it was important to have that one stone who sticks with Benny from the very beginning to the very end, you know, that she's not left by everyone. So there are lots of moments where the movie bends the reality, but that's done with conscious and on purpose. And so I think after all, most of the social workers or most people in the field were very touched to not be the bad guys, because in TV shows, you know, they are usually the bad guys who come and take the kids away, and then you don't look more into their world. But I think they like the complexity of it. But yeah, I mean, as you said, you know, the reaction was very unexpected for us, because in the end it was a low budget first feature social drama about not a taboo topic, but, you know, about something very specific. And at least in Germany, people don't like to look into like the universe of psychiatry wards for kids. You know, we have this thing like psychiatry wards, they're like for the depressive people or the ones with burnouts or the schizophrenics, and then kids are supposed to be happy. But there is a world, you know, where this merges, and it's not very enjoyable to look there. But fortunately, the movie helped a little bit, you know, to do that.
Yeah, that's what cinema's all about, though, right? Shining a light on stuff that we don't really know and educate us more.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's been amazing to see the reaction. I'm so happy everyone's reacted the same way I did. But you know, you've seen the success that you've got now. You're going to be working with Sandra Bullock. Helena's working now with Tom Hanks and Paul Greengrass. Tell me about the kind of industry and how, you know, for a first feature, like you said, it's amazing, but clearly it's opened a lot of doors.
Yeah, it did. You know, if you told me 1.5 years ago we would have this conversation, you know, and I would be in LA having worked with Sandra Bullock, having worked with Graham King, I would probably say you're crazy, you know. Same for Helena. I mean, no one thought that these doors would open, and yeah, it's a like a fairy tale in a way. And it's also understanding that all over the globe, people in this industry just love movies. And in the end, it's about storytelling. And we get to work with people who have like a zillion years more experience than we do. But in a way, we meet because we share a passion. You know what I mean? So that's so cool. You know, I think that's what I learned most, and what Helena did as well, that in the end, it's about stories.
Yeah, well, I cannot wait until I get to see the rest of your stories. I hope there's so many more, hopefully ones that won't take 7 years. Can we have them a bit quicker, please, Nora? I think I speak for everyone watching.
I'll try my best.
Thank you so much for speaking to me. It's been amazing talking.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, my pleasure. It was a cool conversation.
You can watch System Crasher on BFI Player now. If you enjoyed this Q&A, please consider donating to the BFI. It's a charity and their venues were closed during lockdown. So your support would be most appreciated to help keep them going. Thank you for watching and have a good night.